The question is written in the title of the session. In a way, I've done my job. It's, you know the question. It's up to you to discuss it. Which of you would like to go first in answering this question? What does the future expect from us? Be brave. Serge.
When I listened to the previous panels, I think an obvious question, an obvious expectation from the future will be that we don't blow up the planet.
That's now, good. That sets a good baseline, yes.
on the other hand, if we blow up the planet, the question has no meaning because there will be nobody to ask to expect that from us. But besides that, I think that what the future can expect from us is that in spite of all the catastrophe, of all the problems that we are living today, that we continue to create knowledge, to give values to civilization, produce things, to try to make the life on Earth better. And I think this happened in the past. We were talking about big pandemics which happened in the past, and the pandemic which would kill half of the population. This happened. In the 14th century, the plague was there in Europe, and it was also the time when the Renaissance was starting in Italy. So I have always been amazed and grateful to these people that in spite of the big problems that they had, they were able to develop civilization and to develop culture and to start the scientific revolution. This happened again in the 20th century. We have had big catastrophes, the First World War, the Second World War, and this was a time when the modern science in physics, in chemistry, in astrophysics, in biology developed. It's during the First World War that Einstein elaborated the theory of general relativity. And this again, I think, is a big mystery for me, the fact that in spite of a lot of fanaticism, of nationalism, of wars and terrible things happening, you have people who have gone on to preserve civilization, to make it thrive and to develop it. And I hope that we will be able to continue to do that in spite of all the bad things that we see happening today.
Is that in some way a representation of the point that Hilmar was making earlier in the day, that people thrive best under adversity?
Sorry, yes. I was thinking of this. Say again.
Oh no, it's good that you're thinking of what your colleagues are saying. No, I was just wondering if that was perhaps a representation of the way of what Hilmar Pedersen was talking about earlier, where he was saying that people thrive in adversity. But anyway, yeah, okay. Beatrice, go next.
I would love to say, because I think that humans, we're very good at responding fast when something dramatic happens. And we're perhaps not so good at the long term, what we have to act now to prevent something from happening in 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we're facing right now with climate change, with nuclear weapons, for example. It's very easy to take the sort of shortcut and tomorrow, we'll deal with it tomorrow. Because the cost of doing it today feels too much for today, even though we know we're going to have to do it at some point. And every day it gets worse and worse and worse. So I think that's really what, getting to what the future expects from us is to do better, be smarter right now, and to not just push it forward into the next thing, and to learn from the past, learn from lessons. We know what science says, we know what the risks are, we just have to really take the kind of cost of doing it now and face it head on, rather than just waiting for someone else to do it at the end of the day. And I think that that's really future generation already are looking at people today, and it's like, why didn't you do something? When you had power, when you were in office, when you were an adult, why didn't you do something? And I think that that's really what we were going to have to answer to future generations.
Paul.
So, Adam, I've woken up now and I've stopped daydreaming. I was just thinking. I think I like to start simply, and I think of John Stuart Mill thinking about the aggregate happiness for a society. And surely we have to bequeath to our future generations a world that is decent to live in, and that means a world that provides certain basic standards of living for everybody, decent healthcare, decent food, decent living, combined with care for the planet and the biosphere that we've touched upon because not only because it's an environment that helps our well-being, but also because we have a responsibility for it. So I think that would be where I would start in thinking about the future. How do we deliver it? Well, we need social conditions that can allow rational thinking and rational delivery of outcomes. And that in turn, being a scientist, I think must involve science in some way. And this is where I would say, I really wanted to say something which I think is quite important, because I think one of the big challenges in thinking about how we can improve the future is how can we embed the complex decisions that society has to make that need science to solve them, so they can be made in a decent social democratic structure. And I don't think that is so simple. It's not simple because the issues are complex. Society doesn't always understand it. Scientists don't always understand it. But it requires a way of working, a democracy that works, that can engage that complexity, but not in a technocratic, top-down sort of way, but in a way which actually truly does engage the whole community. And I would say this is the biggest challenge we have for democracies, for social democracies, firstly to deliver what I said at the beginning, which is a proper society that can operate properly in protection of our world and environment, and that in turn requires a decent ability to be able to make these decisions. Big challenge, but I think it's time we started to talk about it.
Well, Paul, I think first I would want our democracies to survive in a world where the internet makes
That's the starting point, I agree.
autocratic governments so much more survivable than democratic governments because of misinformation and things like that. But you're raising a very important issue about what should be the values, and as mentioned before, when there's large gradients in social living standards, that's a real instability. And one has to recognize that. And the other thing, which was discussed in an earlier panel, if you think you as a rich society can insulate yourself, vaccinate yourself, and do something, and let the poorer countries fend for themselves, it's sorely mistaken. The world is a very small place, and in the end, like it or not, whether you consider that good or just survival or whatever, we have to be our brother's keeper. We live in a very small world. And so the recognition of that, and where the sense of values, that moral responsibility of more equity, but also and the future responsibility is something we have to learn to deal with. And in one of the things in what matters, that certainly matters above, I think, all else.
Thank you. Didier.
Yeah, maybe I can bring up maybe a different angle into this discussion. So, I mean, to talk about the future, usually you should look at the past, because I think it tells you a lot. And if you look at the past, following all the discussion we have had, there is a couple of interesting, I think, elements that we can try to digest and think about. Well, the first thing is clearly life, as it is on Earth, is extremely resilient and extremely adaptable. When you look at the evolution of the condition of the planet itself and how much things has happened, I think whatever we do, it's a bit irrelevant for life. Even if you don't like it, I think life has seen a lot already, and life has its own, I think, development. Now, if you think at this debate we're having today, we're having this debate because 60 million years ago, something dramatic happened. Something fall on Earth, and it was the end, the doomsday of the dinosaurs, and it was great for the mammal, and that's the beginning of the mammal, and at some point, our species start to strive, possibly because something unusual happened with the climate, and something happened and forced our species to leave some nice conditions and to spread the world and to kind of conquer the world. So I think there is something interesting when you reflect that way, is we are just part of a long story into this in terms of the topic of these discussions. Now, there is something else that comes on the top of that, I think, which is not really part of this debate, but is related a little bit, but could be another one, is we are special. And that we have to acknowledge that. And this consciousness element we have, this capability that we have to fly to the moon and to Mars and to understand the law of physics and to dig out what comes from the very back time and the early stage of the universe is quite exceptional. And clearly, it never happened before, certainly not on the life history, what happened on Earth. And that, in a way, should, give us some thought for our thought. And maybe we have some kind of responsibility here. Call it whatever, ethical and moral or whatever, or maybe it's a gift. We have an amazing gift. So this gift is so immense, so exceptional. Maybe we are the only creature alive in this galaxy at the present time to have this debate. Whether there is another Nobel debate in another planetary system, I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe there is life elsewhere, but the idea you end up with this discussion is not something which is a given, I think. So I think this should reflect on what has been said by my colleagues here. I think this is pretty clear. I think given the immense responsibility we're doing, we are a bit like a foolish teenager these days. And then the idea of the old nuclear threat and all this is just very scary. And we don't deserve this gift.
So much power concentrated in these people, and look what they did with it, they will say. Yes, exactly. Serge?
I think one of the problems we are facing in this discussion is that we have different time scales. When you're talking about the evolution of man on the planet, it has taken hundreds of thousands, millions of years, and now we are at a point where things are accelerating at a very fast rate. And there is a law of inertia. The fact that things are accelerating means that we have to take decisions which are crucial for the future, and these decisions have to be made in a system which has inertia, which is going, I have the feeling that we are facing a wall of big challenges and difficulties, and we will not be able to change the human nature at the rate which is needed to become rational about all these problems. It's clear that we need to make decisions, that the politicians have to be able to think of what will happen beyond the horizon of their re-election. I am only talking about democratic countries, and they are not ready to do that because the system is built in such a way that they have to think about the way the fact that they would have to be re-elected before the climate has changed, and before these things are happening. So the paradox is that we are able to figure out what will happen, and at the same time, it's very difficult to do something to change it. And we faced that several times during the century. If you read Stefan Zweig, for example, who wrote about the atmosphere just before the First World War, it was clear that it was expected that big things would happen, but people at a psychological level were not ready to accept it and to change their way of life. And I am afraid that we are in a similar situation now. We are able to figure out what will happen. We say it, we discussed it all the time. In this discussion, usually what happens is that we say, this is one catastrophe, another one, a third one, and in the end, we say, but I am optimistic. I don't know why we say that in the end, because it's exactly contrary to all what we said before.
I share the optimism. I think that science can do wonderful things, but before that happens, there has to be a political will. And you know, when I used to give speeches at the beginning when I was Secretary of Energy to people in Congress, until I was told by my staff, I can't do this anymore. And I said, just imagine you're on your deathbed, and your grandchildren and your children around you, and your grandchildren say, Grandpa, Grandma, you could have changed it. You could have made it better. You could have given us a better world. You didn't. What were you thinking? Didn't you care about us? And then I was told by my staff, you can't say that because it makes the senators very uncomfortable.
Paul.
Well, I think what matters is the timescale, indeed. And I cannot look quite so far in the future as you're able, but I'm not a physicist, so I understand my limitation. I do think that we have to think about society and making democratic decisions and doing it sensibly. I am, on the other hand, an optimist that we will deal with it. And one way of dealing with it is to learn from our mistakes in the past. And one that is being very informative for me is the mistake of Brexit. I come from a country...
Hooray! Yes.
I come from a country that really, despite all its faults in the past, was quite a sensible country that actually contributed to the world in some ways and contributed to Europe. And yet we end up making a lunatic decision because we're led by politicians who have lost all sight of reality, truth, honesty, and the goodness of humankind. We therefore need to learn how that came about and avoid it. And in fact, what I think is the good thing about Brexit is it just shows the rest of Europe just how to mess it up.
Yeah.
And we, rest of Europe, can learn from that, and we will come crawling back with our tail between our legs in the not too distant future.
Let's hope. Paul, did you have the same experience entering Sweden earlier this week that I had, which was, as you it now takes 75 minutes or so to go through passport control, and when you get there, the person behind the counter says, well, that's what you get for being a third world country, which I thought was rude both to Britain and to the rest of the world, actually. But
D'accord, yes.
Beatrice, do you want to chip in here?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just think that there's, also, we've done so many amazing things in the past. Humanity has made enormous achievements, and I think that sometimes we also focus excessively on what is going wrong and don't give enough attention to what is going right now and what people are doing well. And I think that the pandemic was a really stark example of that, where we shut down whole societies to protect vulnerable communities. We helped each other, we went shopping for our neighbors, we helped walk each other's dogs, we protected each other. Science came together and developed a vaccine in record pace. And this rollout, where it rolled out massively all over the world, I mean, it was really incredible. Yet we all focused on the few people that didn't, on the conspiracy theories, on whoever wasn't wearing a mask on the bus, and we kind of obsessively thought too much about a few people that did something not good. And we completely disregard everything that was really well. And I think I thought Stuart Russell was talking about social media and how the algorithms sort of feed these extremists today. We're focusing so much on the negative that we also give people that sort of sense that everything is awful. When things are actually, there's really remarkable things that are happening. People are really kind to each other, helping each other, gathering to fix problems together. And of course it feels, and in many ways it is worse than ever. We can see a war here in Europe, for example. Climate change is accelerating, inequalities is accelerating. But I also think that we are not giving enough attention to the good things and the remarkable things. And things like the European Union, for example, after World War II, the world came together, the loss of war, the United Nations, the European Union, all of this collaboration, multilateralism, global collaboration, human rights treaties. But we take them for granted, we disregard them, we don't really value them long term because we don't talk about it. And we just talk about the one thing that's wrong. And that's how you can start campaigns like Brexit, because we don't actually give enough attention to all the good that is happening and the good stuff. So I think we also have the future also kind of expect us to cherish what is going well and build on that and keep emphasizing that and share that and never stop believing that we can do, maybe not fix everything, but we can fix a little thing. And if everyone just keeps fixing a little bit, it's better than giving up completely.
Thank you. Well. So, a sensible moderator would stop there on that lovely last word, but I'm still going to give a word to Didier.
Yeah, thank you. So there is something which I think is related to what you both said right now, is this assumption that our species behave rationally. And I think this is something we should be a bit careful about that. And maybe in terms of future research, of education, I think we should value more the social sciences and the psychology and all this element, because it was clear that sometimes we expect people to understand all the rational element they come through them. It is not that easy easy if you don't consider the global scheme. So I think there is a need for more funding, more support on the social sciences in the general, considering the impact it has. And clearly the Brexit, and when you mentioned conspiracy theory, is related to that.
And that's what I meant we should learn, because it was irrationality that drove decisions, and we need to learn how that comes about in a very sensible nation so that we can avoid it in the past. I don't pretend that we can move to a rational utopia. That will never happen. But we have to learn from what's happened.
So I think it's a matter of education. I think we have to improve the general level of education to make citizens which are able to recognize rational thinking from just opinions, to understand what false promises and fake news mean. And this would be the only way that a decision like Brexit could not be made in a democratic country, because we have to understand that it was made under perfectly democratic rules, which is very... And what I want to say now is that even now, in spite of all what you said, I think the word come back, just to go reverse the Brexit is still taboo, from what I understand, in your country.
No, there's a majority now to go back if you take the polls, but it won't happen quickly, but it will happen, I guarantee.
Okay. I hope so.
I just want to say something, 30 seconds. It's ascribed to Confucius. If you think in a year, plant a seed. If you think in 10 years, plant a tree. If you think in 100 years, teach people.
That's right. Yeah, good point.
Okay. Good place to stop.
Good end.
Okay. I think leaving the last word to Confucius is a good plan. So from this panel, a plea for rationality and positivity. A nice way to end. Thank you very much indeed to all of you.
Thank you.